Hello everyone, and thank you for joining, and welcome to our first Class Combos talk in partnership with Second Act Gallery and funded by Arts Council. So I'm Sarah Metcalf, and I'm the founder and director of the Working Class Creatives Database, along with Chanel Windass, who is also here today. So Chanel and I have programmed a series of talks in response to the members' survey we sent out in October 2023, where members were asked for more advice on representation, sales, confidence, portfolios, and routes into the arts. Today we're joined by Alex Zawadzki of Second Act Gallery, Ell Pennick of Guts Gallery, and Bella Bonner of Stephen Friedman, previously Studio West.
Members have been asked prior to the event to submit questions, which will be answered by the speakers, and then you can also submit questions in the chat. If we have time at the end, they'll be answered. And just a little housekeeping, this event is recorded and will be available online afterwards. If we could ask that all audience members turn their mics and cameras off and adhere to the code of conduct, which is just in the chat. You just want to have a little browse over that. And we will be sending a feedback form at the end of each talk. So if you could spare 5 minutes to just fill that in and get that back to us, that'd be great as well. We're going to hand over to Alex, who's going to steer the session.
Hi, and thank you very much to you two for organising this. You've put a brilliant programme together and really coordinated this so well and set us off with these questions to work on. So what we'll do today is we'll have a little introduction from the two speakers who are joining me and myself. And then what we've been given is a set of questions that have been dropped in by people who are in this talk and who've audience members today. And I think basically I have the gallery called The Second Act, which I'll talk more about in a moment, but I generally try and support and prioritise artists from working class backgrounds and northern backgrounds. And it could be that you are both, or it could be that you're one of the two. What I found is that I've been following a lot of the things that Working Class Creatives database do, particularly because it's the perfect place for me to see and get a temperature check on working class artists, their needs, and also look at new talent. And I really found the things they were doing looked so professional, and they're so together with all these things, and they do so much work, but they're really not funded and putting so much of this work out there for free. So I really applaud them for that. And I think the reason I wanted to work with Chanel and Sarah, two reasons. One, I saw that it was a way that some of the Arts Council funding that I've managed to attract for the gallery could be used in partnership, so to develop their organisation and start getting them into Arts Council funded spaces. And second, because my role as a gallerist is that I want to represent as well and support artists' career development, but I don't have a huge amount of time, and I'm not the best placed person to help working class artists get the advice and support they need in kind of some of the more general levels of practice development. Because I'm getting so many requests of people sending portfolios or wanting to engage, there is a limited amount of time I have to answer those requests. So being able to do this meant we could reach between us like a much more huge audience. So it was a really exciting way to work together. So I'm really grateful for their work on this, and also this Arts Council fund that we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get each of the speakers to talk a little bit about their practice, their work, what they do, their background for about 5 minutes. Then I'll introduce a bit more about mine, and then we're going to try and just get into a bit of an open debate using these questions that we've been given as a framework. Towards the end, I'm just going to suggest that if you've got any questions, maybe take a note of them, and towards the last 10 minutes, you could knock them in the chat box, because if you've got questions halfway through, we might have answered them by the end, and then we'll spend some time at the end trying to answer any new questions that come in. So we didn't discuss before, but do you mind, Bella, would you mind going first? Are you happy to take on and just talk for maybe like 5 minutes about your background and how you've ended up in this talk and what you do in your work?
Of course. Hi, I'm Bella Bonner-Evans. So I, as of a month ago, work at Stephen Friedman Gallery. But prior to that, I was at a gallery called Studio West, which is a much smaller gallery in Notting Hill. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got to there. So I grew up in Warwickshire, went to a girls' grammar school, And it was quite weird just from that very point onwards, because there was a huge wealth divide even at my school, in secondary school. So it was something that I think I was quite aware of from a young age. I then made the quite foolish decision to go to Cambridge, which again, the imposter syndrome was immense, and I ended up dropping out because I just didn't feel that I fitted in or kind of connected there. And the art history course was like extremely traditional, like very much cathedrals and churches, and it just really wasn't what I was looking for. So then I sort of post breakdown moved to London to live in a very small room in Clapton, and paying £400 of rent a month, managed to get a job working in fashion, and that's kind of where I started. And then subsequently went to Goldsmiths, where I did fine art and history of art, and I think that was really amazing. It felt like a really supportive cohort, and it was a great place to sort of learn about contemporary art in a much more kind of vibrant and discursive context, I guess. It was just much more experimental. Following that, so I was doing my degree show, but at the same time knew that I needed an income. So having worked as an invigilator at Victoria Miro and Lisson during my time at Goldsmiths, I managed from trolling arts jobs to get a job at a small PR firm doing art and culture PR. Did that for a year, and then went to Studio West because they were one of our clients, and they asked me to curate a show, and it sort of grew organically. And then my most recent move to Stephen Friedman was again quite organic. Someone I'd sort of met in art mentioned the role to me, and yeah, I was very fortunate to secure it, I guess. So it's kind of been an unpredictable journey, but yeah, I think one I don't regret.
All right, thank you so much. Elle, would you mind taking over and talking a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Ell Pennick, and I'm from a small mining town in North Yorkshire. I went to just the usual normal school, and then I went to Leeds College of Art to study. Because at GCSE level, I was really persuaded to go on and push my like creative side. And then from Leeds, I had an amazing education there. It was free, it was extended diploma, and I went on to study. I moved to London at Chelsea College of Art. I struggled a bit at Chelsea College of Art. The people and weren't really my cup of tea, and the class divide was very apparent. But I managed to trudge through with that. And then I applied for the Royal College of Art. I got in, but I couldn't afford to go there. So at this point, it was a pretty like shitty time of my life, to be honest. And I was living above a pub, working 3 jobs. And I had this rat that would actually circle my bedroom. That's how grim it was. It was something else. And yeah, so there was a function room above this pub as well. And I asked the landlord if I could start putting shows on of my mates' work. And he said, yeah, go for it. Do it for free, and then I'll get the B money. And that was our deal. So I was working my 3 jobs doing this project space, and then I met this guy called Kevin, who was working class, and he's from Glasgow, and he sold his company for a good amount of money, and he became an artist, and he wanted to help me like start the business. So he gave me a lot of advice about what books to read and how to set up a business. And that's where like Guts Gallery came from. And we were nomadic for a while to save money. And then finally I saved enough money to get a permanent space in Hackney. So that's where we're located at the moment. It's been a bit of a journey, but yeah, it's been a graft, to be honest. But I'm here now.
Right, thanks. I'm sure we'll unpick loads more about what you've both said. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background, how I'm here. And whilst trying to be succinct, because I'm someone who's been through a few careers. I'm a bit older than the other speakers in this room. And yeah, I have a sort of complex relationship with class. You know, my background is I'm both sides of my family are Polish from different levels of immigration, and think those relationships with class are a little bit different when you're from different countries. But I was born into a family where my mum was working in a factory and my dad was a builder, but during my childhood they went through a period of social mobility. But I've always had this kind of understanding around these things about class and particularly about labour, and a real notion that like graft and hard work are kind of embedded in my family. And like what I always remember as a kid was that my mum was really into art. She loved to draw, she liked going to galleries. So I was just really lucky to be taken to those places and see that that was something I was interested in. It was clear I was always going to be involved in something in art. And I did the thing that people do, I left school, did my GCSEs, I didn't do A-levels, I went to art college. And what I saw when I was doing that was, my perception was that to make a career out of art, you had to paint or pictures or make sculptures and sell them, and you had to be really good at that, otherwise there wasn't another option. So I copped out of it, just didn't seem like the way for me. And I worked in lots of different fields, but I'll keep that bit out of this because it's too complex. But I ended up working in an industry that was very much about me being very logistical and practical, and I learned a huge amount of skills that were not creative. And then when I got into working in art, I had so much of my story, and I think this is something to talk about through our questions later, is it luck versus work, or is it luck over being in the right place, or is it about your kind of input and where you've put yourself? And my sister had started working in the cultural sector, and she asked me to come and do some contracting and do some administrative stuff. And I started working with her on those things. I think I did a day a week for a bit. And very slowly, I kind of started doing more time really on administrative work in this sector. And I became a producer. So I cut my teeth as a creative producer, like cultural festivals. And then I got exposed to artists and arts commissioning, and I just knew I wanted to do that kind of work. And I realised that there were loads of different ways to work in art that were not about being an artist and selling artworks. And the practical skills that I'd learned along the way suddenly made me kind of the right person to be in that industry. And like through that process, I was working with an artist who's commissioned called Jamie Holman, and we just clicked. And that is one of those places, is it luck or is it that we pursued it? But we were such a good click in the way we worked together that we started delivering commissions together. And that was more me as a curator and him as the artist. But we met through him kind of advising me how to curate a show, because he was one of the commissioned artists in a programme on a festival I was working on. So that opportunity just grew of us applying for things and learning about that industry until we kind of established a team of people doing that. So this is one of the lucky breaks, is that we had a space that we were using that the council let us use, which was an artist-led space, and that kind of practice of having a free space, renting bits out to studio artists, and then creating a program that was really about artists showing but not about selling. And I fell into that by meeting people through these arts organisations, through the college and through the festival I was working on. And essentially, like through doing that work, I kind of realised that there was no really viable options for people in Blackburn, where that is, or largely in Lancashire and parts of the northwest that aren't located in a big city, or even Manchester nearby doesn't have a huge provision for commercial arts and galleries that represent and sell people's work. And I wondered why that wasn't happening. And what I noticed is in the artist-led spaces, a lot of people were putting these exhibitions on with this kind of hope that someone from a London gallery would come up and see the work and like pick them up. And I always talk about this like glass slipper Cinderella story, that people were expecting this to happen. And I guess I talked more to people about this desire to have a career rather than just work and sort of exhibit and do it for the sake of the art. They wanted it to be the way they made their money. And I felt like it was time to try and take control of that a bit, and that if we as a group of people kind of establish something and set up a commercial space in the north, I could take that work down where there are more collectors in places like London. So started kind of dabbling with that idea and got a COVID grant during lockdown, which was basically the only way I managed to set up the gallery. I set it up like Elle was a nomadic thing, like and I started by going to Artsy and talking about the gallery. But if any of you know about Artsy, you have to be a gallery that's established to be on there. And it's a place that you can sell work if you're a gallery, but you have to have some kind of reputation. So I applied and was rejected. When they said you're rejected, I wrote back and said, well, you're talking about diversity in the arts and you're not representing a lot of Northern artists and also working class artists. So I think we should have a conversation about it. And I pushed that, and they actually let me onto Artsy, and that's how kind of the gallery as it is was born. And I guess because I saw a lot of the artists in the north are working class from small towns, and that was an area where people were struggling to kind of move into the next sphere. And what I'll say at that point is one of the advisors at Artsy then suggested I speak to Elle. And quite some time ago, 3.5 years ago, we had a call and talked for about an hour and talked about the things that they were doing and the things that I was planning to do. And it was one of those kind of early points where you realise that just having those conversations can help you establish ideas and think about the way you're doing things, and gave me the confidence to move forward and keep doing the gallery. So the gallery's been nomadic, mobile, online, with a focus on taking place in biennials and arts programmes for 2.5 years. And then I moved and got a gallery space in London about a year ago, and that is totally down to the investment of somebody who I've met through arts festivals and going to art fairs. Is a collector who's super interested in what we were doing and wanted to invest in us having that space. And I like to own that, because a lot of people don't talk about the fact that they get that investment, and that's how you're enabled to do these things. That I could never have opened that space on my own. So yeah, I've been doing that for about a year, and I also run my second business as a studio practice on the side. So basically the work splits me between Blackburn in the north of England and this little gallery in Shoreditch. And that's where I'm currently at the moment. So what I'd like to do is try and address some of the questions that people have been putting into the email system before the talk. And I'm going to try and just throw them out. So if we all come off our mute and all have our mics open, happy for people to just chip in as they hear something that they feel like they can respond to. That's the speakers, not the whole room, by the way. That'll be a bit chaotic. Okay. So there's like a few different subject areas. I'll just give you an overview that the questions have fallen into. Questions about starting out, challenges and finding support. Questions about artists and galleries, and that's about their relationships. About location and education. Materials and marketability. Roles of gallerists and industry evolution, inclusivity and collaboration, and then about advice and success stories. So yeah, we'll start with a question that comes from starting out, the challenges and finding support. So somebody has asked, are there any specific challenges or barriers that you have faced or you've watched working class artists face in entering the gallery scene, and how can these be combated?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Classism. Like just pure classism straight out, and it is really, really hard to navigate, and you just feel like you're not meant to be in that space, and you're not allowed in that space as well. It makes you feel really, really like awful. And it's about, I think, finding your community like we're doing now, and calling that out and saying that's not acceptable, that's not okay, and really trying to navigate it in the best way possible. But it's so tricky. But yeah, classism, definitely.
Can I ask you a question? Like, how do you find that manifests? Has that been around you or your artists, like verbally, or is that just a sensation you get around people who behave in a certain way or exclude people?
It's both, I'd say. All of it. It manifests in different ways. Really, really tricky to navigate, and it's still happening now, which is so disappointing.
And what about you, Bella?
Yeah, I think building on to that, I think it can be in less like a in my experience, I think I'm quite good at passing, like, because I don't have an accent because I grew up in the Midlands, I think I can sort of be perceived in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different contexts, which in a sense is kind of sad, because that shouldn't be necessary in any possible sense. But what I have noticed among some of my peers is just like the way in which other people of the same age as me, but from different backgrounds, are basically born into having clients and are able to travel to all the fairs and do all of these things. Like, they're just able to really be a lot more active in the art scene on a kind of international level, and engage with, even just going to dinner with a certain client, like they can afford to join that dinner that frankly other people can't afford to join. So I think there are a lot of spaces that the type of space it is, whether it's because it's international, because of the nature of what the gathering surrounds, are inherently exclusive. But the people with sort of wealth don't realise that at all. They don't realise actually even it's an expensive thing to do, or that it's excluding somebody. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that I think one of the things is often about access and the finances around things a lot of the time. I think one of the things when I've been, as I mentioned, got an Arts Council bid to support some of the things that I'm doing in the gallery, because I'm touring the shows in London to Blackburn. I think it's really hard to get Arts Council funding in London at the moment, but the work I'm doing in Blackburn makes it quite accessible. But a lot of the things I wrote into that were about giving artists the funds to be able to spend time on the prep, even if you don't make new work, the prep for making the work for a show, or organising the work, transporting work particularly, those costs, or coming down to your own opening, and all of those things become complex. And I think when you can't afford to do those things, or you're in that position, that creates a barrier for yourself emotionally or around that stuff as well, and feeling like, oh, I'm not meant to be in this place. And rather than giving and affording an artist the opportunity to just really focus on the work. So I'd agree, we agree with all those things. And I think a lot of it as well is just talking more clearly about those things. I mean, my sort of feeling towards supporting working class artists is I try not to create an echo chamber around it by making the work all about class, although a lot of the work that I show in the gallery does have references to it. But the idea for me is about getting artists from working class backgrounds on the same playing field as international national artists, without a dialogue about what it is, and just finding ways to support those people into that place, I think. So following on from that, and I think this is included in some of that answer, is, have you experienced a lack of confidence or imposter syndrome, and what would your advice be to combat this?
Definitely. I mean, I left a degree because of it.
Yeah.
I thought it was a dream to go to Cambridge, and I worked really hard to get there, and then I was absolutely miserable there. The art history course was 25 students, and they were basically majority women who knew each other from private schools in London. And I walked in on the first day, and I knew from that moment onward that I'd be really unhappy there. Luckily, it was definitely the right thing in the end, but that feeling that I had at that moment has definitely continued into lots of other, environments and spaces more latterly as well. But in terms of how to combat it, what I found has really helped is like finding your tribe within the industry. And that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be people of the same background. Like it could be anyone who is willing to listen and understand your experience. Because I found that, going to certain types of perhaps intimidating events feels so much easier when you have somebody to go with. And so often a friend will text saying, oh, I don't want to go in without you. When are you getting here? And I think everybody's had that feeling. So I think when you find a community of people who can, want to share those spaces too, it can sort of help you feel comfortable there because you're a part of things.
Yeah, and I know there's a few kind of groups that go around where you can join groups of people who want to go to gallery openings or interested in art, and those are the kind of things where you can find that little support network. What about you, Al?
I mean, I agree with Bella completely. Pretty much spot on. I struggled at Chelsea a lot. There was just people from different classes, and the disparity was just so apparent, and I almost felt a bit humiliated a lot of the time as well, like the way that even my accent would be taking the piss out of where I'm from. Like everything was just a bit of it really got me down. But there's two other people who were working class on the course, which is crazy that there was only two other people. That had to change anyway. And they were my tribe. So I agree with what Bella was saying about finding your tribe. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, I think it's not most people would say this, I don't get it a lot, and I don't get it a lot, and I think because what I'm aware of is that everyone's a little bit different in their personalities, and I really tuned into that over time when I work with people. Like some people are very extroverted, some people are very introverted, and we're born differently, where we have these different parts of our nature. And I am quite an extroverted person, but I wasn't when I was younger. I was incredibly, people wouldn't believe how shy I was. And a lot of that stuff that's changed for me has come through combating some difficult experiences and having to overcome them, but then also about that muscle memory of just being forced to go in situations where I had to talk and talk and talk and talk until it became natural. And actually now I really enjoy being in those kind of spaces. And But that's like a lucky thing for me. And I think for some people, there are different ways to, so some of the advice I might give will not fit you. And there isn't a blueprint for how to do this. If you're a really introverted person, you probably have some amazing skills that apply to how you make work and how you can get things out of you creatively that don't work for me at all. But so I would say trying to find some ways that work for you around your personality type. But if you really like up for pushing yourself into spaces and networking, yeah, just keep doing it. And like once you do it with people a few times, just keep doing it because it will get easier. You know, if anything, to like this week, I would if there's any imposter syndrome I had, I was thinking about this talk and thinking like, how much can I tell people that these are the things you can do and this will be easy, because it's not easy. Like, and I'm sure everyone who is speaking here today will agree, like, this is really hard work for us in the jobs we're in, not as artists. And sometimes a lot of that stuff you're seeing is shop front. You know, you think it's like success, they're in a stable income. And I can't speak for everyone in the room today, but my income's not stable. My workload's not stable. There are nights I go to sleep worrying terribly about things that are going on with the business. So yeah, it isn't easy. And if there's any imposter syndrome I have, it might be more about trying to tell everyone how to do something, which I know is not that easy. Yeah. What I would say is, next question for both of you in different ways is, what advice would you give to a new curator and gallerist starting out, and how can you find your audience and network? Elle, will you talk about it from the perspective of a gallerist?
Yeah, I would say look at how you can save as much money as possible. Like going nomadic was the best thing I did, because the overheads were just cut massively, and that was really amazing. And also have a mission statement and an ethos and stand out from everybody else. Like if you're supporting working class artists, say you're supporting them, and then the press actually do really pick up on that, and you might get more coverage and, you know, word spreads. So be powerful with your message and be like unapologetic and just go for it.
I would say, leading on from what Elle said, I'd start with like, if you want to, I think gallerist is different because there's a lot to consider, but when it comes to curator, there's no argument to say just do it, because who can sort of tell you you're a curator or not? Kind of no one. So if you can start speaking to, you know, going to visit galleries and speaking, you know, with discretion to the gallerist, understanding that they're busy, but just sort of saying, you know, when I was at Studio S, people used to come in all the time and say, oh, I'm kind of starting out as a curator. And we didn't do sort of shows curated by other people there, but a lot of venues do. You know, I mean, Guts has that element, and a lot of other venues have that element. Sarah Kravitz is an amazing gallerist who does that too, invites other curators. So I think if you start sort of thinking about who you can go and politely introduce yourself to and just say, you know, do you have any gaps in your program? Is there any way I can support? Can I get involved? And oftentimes people are working so hard in these galleries that they are open to someone supporting and getting involved and having kind of learning from them and working together. And then the other thing I'd say that's been really helpful for me in all aspects has been Instagram. Like I've used it to meet so many clients internationally. I've used it to connect with artists and to connect with other people in the industry. So I think if you see someone online who you think you might be able to speak to about your idea or collaborate, just like if you can be bold enough to say, would you mind getting a coffee? A lot of people will say yes, is what I've always found, honestly. People are kinder and less intimidating than they often appear from the outside.
Yeah, my only thing I would chip into that is, if you're looking to start out as a curator, or even looking at the long term, potentially having your own gallery, is to get involved with, look up where there's a set of studios with an gallery attached, just an artist-led space. It's just the perfect way to ease your way into it, because they are, you know, they're very short on capacity and people, and yeah, they sometimes want new ideas, but it's a really great way to build into an audience that already exists of artists already in the studio. So connect with whoever's doing that locally to you, for sure. So the next question, and I think I mentioned it before, is how hard is it for a working class artist to become a full-time artist, and do most have jobs on the side from your experience?
Yeah, like, so I would say that all of the artists at Guts are from a working class background, and when they first started, they all had one job or two jobs, just to support themselves and pay rent. And then eventually, when their work started selling and we managed to put the prices up, they're all in a position now where they're working full-time as an artist, which is absolutely amazing. But it took a lot of hard work to get there, and it took a lot of graft for them, and a lot of, I'd say, patience as well.
That's really amazing. Something I totally aspire to within our gallery setup is to try and nurture people towards this as being their full-time career. And do you think that is has a parity with middle or upper class artists? Do you think, because there's a challenge for all artists, isn't there, to break into this?
Yeah, no, I'd say so. And I think also, like, I chat to a lot of the artists and they go, oh, am I middle class now? Like, and they have that fear that of becoming middle class. And I go, maybe we are. But yeah, it's complex. It's a really complex one, but I'm really proud of them because at the end of the day, it's them. They've done this work and they've got to where they've got, which is amazing to see.
I would say while I was at Studio West, we worked with like quite a large range of artists. So I saw, I guess, a lot of different experiences from people who, you know, had a lot of freedom with their time and the ability to buy sort of complicated, you know, production materials and things like that, to others who, you know, were only able to make on 1 day a week because they spent the other 6 in a variety of different jobs. So I think I have witnessed it all. And I would say that nonetheless, whatever your situation is, if you really genuinely love what you're making and you're really working hard at it, you can still shine. Like, you don't have to be doing it full time to have some success. If that's not a choice for you at the beginning, that's completely fine. And the other thing is, having a job can bring an interesting variety. Like, if you try and get a job in an art world setting, it could be an amazing place where you learn more. You know, if you could also work as a gallery assistant, that might really help you gain insight into the industry. So I think while having a job and not being able to create art full time is really difficult, if you can think strategically about what that other job might be, it could benefit you in the long term. So it could be a way to sort of take a challenging situation and make it work to your advantage.
Great. So moving on to the artist and gallery relationship. So the question is, how do you decide which artists to represent in your gallery? And what can emerging or working class artists do to get noticed by gallery owners?
Well, we're such a small team, we can't like reply to every submission that gets emailed. It's just so difficult. We're absolutely rammed. But something I do is that I try and go out my way to go to the end of year shows up north. I try and do as much as possible where I'm looking at Instagram and like actively searching for working class artists. And Instagram's always like a really great one, but also meeting people in person, which I know is tricky if it's based on location, but just meeting people in person, having coffees with them and having like a really chilled relationship has been really beneficial for me, and it seems more like organic, I'd say.
Okay.
I would agree with both Instagram and art schools and art school shows that Elle said, and I think it's a responsibility of galleries that work with emerging artists to not just see the shows in London, but to see the shows as far afield as possible. And that might also be international, where people have the ability and the finances, because that is, you know, a way in which you can spot talents from everywhere with all different backgrounds, not just those that are able to live and work in London for a period. Also, word of mouth, I think, has been really impactful for me in terms of people recommending each other. And then, interestingly, looking at it from the perspective of like now being at Stephen Friedman, obviously a gallery that's works with, you know, enormous sort of very, very big artists. It's interesting to think about, you know, they also look in similar places, you know, from word of mouth, from Instagram, from something they might see at a fair. So it doesn't sort of change in that way. It can just be this organic chance moment. So I guess that goes back to what's really important is using your Instagram as a portfolio, thinking carefully about how you're kind of deploying information on there, like having a website where you can, and I guess using Instagram to reach out to people. Like I said earlier, I think that can be really good, because if you send an email, it can be harder for a really busy gallerist to actually look at your materials, but they can click your Instagram and they can see your materials, and they may not have capacity to get back to you, but at least they might have had a look.
Yeah, Instagram for me is such a great way to find things. It's something I'm doing when I'm in bed at night. I'm always looking at those things and something just twigs. And what I would say to people on that is, and this might not be for everyone, but I mean, first of all, have something in the bio on your Instagram. This should be for everyone. Have a link to your website on your Instagram. And if you are going to use your Instagram for some personal things as well, try and make it clear that there is artwork within there and that I can look at it and see it quite clearly. And just do the best you can with photographs. Like really try and make them look as you can always get a professional looking photograph with your telephone. So clear white backgrounds, no clutter around them. But the ones that I find the most appealing, obviously, if I look at someone's page and it is literally pictures of artworks or process shots and it's all about their art. Yeah, clean and well presented makes such a difference, and it shows that you kind of have that understanding of professionalism. And obviously I want to work with people who are professional because that's easier, so it shows that kind of ambition. I guess one of the things I would say is when you talk about artists that I want to represent, there's more than me just liking the work, you know, and that's about how well we get on, unfortunately, as well, because that relationship becomes long term, and it can be a relationship with someone I'm taking calls late at night if that person's got a daytime job, and you want to feel that the relationship is warm and easygoing. Being, you know, someone who's open to kind of taking feedback or talking through the work and things like that is really good. And there is an element of taste, you know. I think I have a very specific taste in work. It might not be clear to some people, but there is, like, people have said to me, there's a hardness to the work I'm interested in. So there is, you have to remember that taste is a part of it as well. And I'm always drawn to people who have quite clear bodies of work, or at least showing a very consistent way process of making work, and we're not seeing big periods without work in between, because that shows that person is ambitious and trying. And I guess the other thing, and probably talk about this a bit later in this question set, is the way you present your work. If you are making it look really high spec or framing and finishing it well, I appreciate here that some people don't have the money for that. But if you can do the best you can with the materials you have, again, it just becomes more slick, and it just draws me into the work that I see. So these are just little tips that might kind of draw someone towards you. Yeah, and I think that's kind of the key points I would just get yourself started with. And when people do send me PDFs or things, I mentioned this to Chanel the other day, if someone drops me an email or something and I don't know them, I'm less likely to start talking to them if I haven't had like a couple of email chats or a couple of Instagram chit chats or something to give me a human connection to that person, rather than just a cold call. And that's just psychology. Like, I'm more warm towards people who are open to looking at things when I kind of know who they are a little bit. But yes, you know, all this stuff is really hard. It's scary to contact people you don't know, but do start putting those things in place. And I think the next question also comes on this, which is, what are some of the common mistakes artists make when they're trying to work with galleries, and what advice would you give about the business side of your work?
If we're talking about when they're already working with a gallery, so
yeah, I think so. In this question,
having a conversation with someone about a show,
yeah,
I think knowing that you've got some power in that relationship, because the gallery or the individuals come to you with interest. So I think it's very important to realize you don't just have to say yes to everything. You don't have to bend to someone else's whim constantly. You can have sort of ideals that are important to you from the outset. Perhaps there's a certain way that it really matters to you that the work is understood or displayed, or something in your bio that you want mentioned or not mentioned, or, you know, it might be something small, but it might be very important to you, and you should be able to make that clear. I also think being direct and professional. So although you can be friendly in sort of conversation, you don't have to kind of act like you're talking to a lawyer. At the same time, I think being able to set clear sort of professional boundaries, you know, I'm able to work on 4 pieces for this exhibition, this is my timeline. You know, it shows that you've got that forethought and that you're kind of running your career in that professional manner, which I always find that really helpful. Yeah, that kind of element of clarity up front on what someone's thinking, and be aware that you can set boundaries. You can say, I'd like a little longer to think about this, or I'm not going to be flexible on my commission split, or, you know, you have that capacity to be very clear about your needs. And I think that often gets pushed down by some galleries when people want to get their own way and they feel like the gallery has the power. So I think it's really important to remember you do have power.
No, I completely agree with Bella. I think you absolutely nailed it with that one. I think, you know, artists forget that they are the centre of the art world, and without artists, there is no gallerists or curators. Um, so yeah, I completely agree, basically.
I guess what would be a good idea is ahead of time or early on in your career, try and think about what those boundaries might be for you, what's important to you in the way that you work with others. Because then when you're confronted with those conversations, you have had that time to think about it in advance, maybe. And you could ask friends, you know, if a friend's done an exhibition, you could ask them, oh, did you have a consignment agreement? What did it look like? So you could get some examples or things to compare.
Mm.
Yeah, the only thing I'd chip into that is like contracting. Like, how often do we do things without contracting? And then when it comes to a problem or a negotiation, you don't have any agreement and people see it in two sides. Having that written in paper before you start is just, it will take so much heat off you when you enter into that challenge or that negotiation as well. So what about location and education? So the question is, does where you went to university matter for being seen and represented by a gallery?
I would say it shouldn't, but it still seems to. So it shouldn't, because gallerists and curators should, you know, and can travel to all sorts of art schools around the UK and further afield, but often don't. In terms of just, if I think about the exhibitions at London galleries that I've seen who show emerging artists over the past year, I've seen a lot more London-based artists. So I think that, you know, statistically, I think there is a kind of, in my view, there is a correlation between a kind of quicker pickup and being in London. But that definitely doesn't mean that there aren't some, you know, if you look at, I think, what's her name? Louise Giovanni, is that her name?
Yeah.
With White Cube, for example, like people do look further afield. You know, you don't have to be in London and it shouldn't matter. But just based on the evidence of my experience, I think London does seem to be, it seems to be able to pick up your career a little bit more quickly, I would say.
It's still definitely the centre of the art world, London is, unfortunately. I would just say play the game though. Like, you know, we're not paying for tuition fees up front, if we're domestic students. So that there's ways around it, which can make it a little bit easier. So yeah, play the game to your advantage, and still be proud of being working class while you're doing that as well.
There's something, I mean, we've rolled two questions together as well, which is the next one was, is it important to be part of the London scene as well? I mean, obviously for me, what university you went to doesn't matter at all for my gallery, but I know for galleries that, you know, of a higher status have been around longer than me, that they are going to look at that, and there is an elitism around it. I mean, my sort of process around setting the gallery up in London was that I could be more like a conduit for an artist in the north. So you know, you get that talent retention of people in the north still having studios up here, while galleries like myself take their work down there. But I think, yeah, we have seen Louise Giovanelli's success and the artists who were working around them in one shared studio. You're seeing a really flourishing scene in Manchester with people represented by Grimm Gallery, Workplace Gallery, and White Cube all in one set of studios. But that's happened in the last couple of years. But as far as I know, I haven't seen anything kind of such a burgeoning art scene in the north, but or in Manchester particularly. But it does seem like it's happening, and I think the kind of growth of everyone working online and being able to see people's work over Instagram has meant that discovery of artists in different places is becoming easier and more accessible. So talking about materials and marketability. So do you have a preference for certain types of materials in the works you choose to exhibit? How do materials impact the marketability and perceived value of an artwork?
Well, I'm a sucker for a painting, like, and that's just my personal taste, and that's, I don't know how it's happened, but it just happens, and sculpture, and of course we do performance art and video art and everything. But I think there has to be an honest conversation about the fact that painting and sculpture does sell more than performance art or video art. Like, it is possible, and there are collectors out there for that sort of work. But it is true that I've noticed in my gallery, painting and sculpture sell more, which is unfortunate. But there are different like pathways for different practices, like external funding, etc. But under this Tory government, it's quite hard to find it.
Yeah. I often hear the word sort of difficult work. I often hear that term used, and it sort of is used to denote work that's basically hard to sell. like people sort of throw it around, or it's quite difficult work. And then there are certain collectors who deliberately collect difficult work, and that's kind of their thing, you know, as else. They're a minority, obviously. I think there's two things. If you've got a vision, don't compromise your practice, but think about how you can supplement it. And is that an external job? Is it that you are through and through a video artist, but therefore you also get a different kind of job that you manage to sort of run them? Or is it that there's a way of bringing in photography or prints or a slightly other sort of commercial aspect that can help support you as you move forward to then, you know, hopefully a great big video commission in the tape, but it's like you don't start there. On a personal level, like some of the really impressive things that I've seen from artists is, I'm thinking, I worked with an amazing artist who's also a jeweler, and that artist has really used their relationship with sort of fashion and wearable art to support their career in more conceptual kind of installation-based, sculpture-based fine art. So they're able to sell, you know, more jewelry items that are used to be worn without sort of compromising their practice, and they let those two things speak to each other. So like, you know, maybe you're a sculptor, but also there's a way in which your art can be lived with as a table, or, you know, is there a way you can diversify how people can have it in their home or live with it or engage with it that maybe makes it slightly more commercial without undermining your vision? That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think that's a really great like parallel with the fashion world, that there's always been this process of having haute couture, and then there's a process of the trickle down process that then becomes the things that we see in our shops, and then they become like boiled down into something wearable, and the two support each other. Or a haute couture fashion designer is going to have things that are sellable and wearable, and I think there is some more of that coming into the art world where people have things. So Marina Abramovich famously like said she could never sell a video work or performance work, but she made stills of certain pieces, and that's how she monetized her practice and her work. So I think and I'm aware some artists really reject that, and that's okay. But this is, if you're interested in selling through galleries, finding ways to make something that is more commercially viable, that makes sense. And I think it's the kind of thing you can get into conversation with your gallerist about and ask and inquire about whether this might be the next evolution of the piece of work. So prints and editions are obviously a really great way of doing that. And I think some of this stuff about materiality is, you know, and I've absorbed things from different people over time, and I work with Derbyshire's framers, really great framers in London, who have really taught me about the practicalities of, are you making work that will fit through a door? Are you making work that is accessible and can hang in people's houses? And if you're starting out and you can't afford to get things perfectly framed, like, find a frame that's really pretty decent, that's pretty made, and make work that fits inside it. And those kind of practical thinking beforehand can help you create work that then sells as well. One of the things that I would say that I've spoken to a lot of artists about, especially when they're starting out, is if you're kind of buying shop bought ready-made canvases, that is really going to limit the selling power of them. So, you know, do your best to kind of get that kind of roll of canvas, learn how to stretch canvases, learn how to get the practical foundations of that work in place. And I found myself with artists I'm supporting and nurturing, like I've bought them a roll of canvas and let them try out. And the difference between using that really great paint is so significant in the way they evolve the work. So look at little bursaries and things. I know there's things like the Elephant Trust where you can apply for a bursary for some materials, and start looking at ways that you might finance your work through little grants and things like that. It's not always got to be a huge Arts Council grant. There are little pots of money out there that might be able to support that. And I know Working Class Creatives Database, in that chat group, like often people have asked about it, and we've all shared links to things where you can find ways to kind of build on that. So I do think that is important. So moving on, as we rattle through these questions, the questions now are about the role of the gallerists and industry revolution. So the questions, and I'll roll these together. So what do you think is the role of a gallerist and galleries in the future of this digital age? And the other question is, how do you see the art world evolving in the next decade? So we could debate those together.
I think what I take from that question is sort of two questions.
Yeah, it's two questions.
Well, literally and also ideologically.
Yeah.
Because there's like a point around what's the role of the gallerist. And I think, you know, what that is now and what that is in future are kind of should be like, someone like Elle is probably trying to bridge what that is now and what it should be like in the future. And I think even older galleries are shifting and changing, like who their directors are, and that is sort of changing the way in which they're run. But then there's also this question around like evolution and the digital, which I wonder if the implication there is more about people engaging online or galleries moving into digital spaces. And on that, I would say that especially during lockdown, like a lot of people sold a lot of art in lockdown. And I think they did it because a lot of clients, maybe artists don't always realize this, but don't see the work in person. You know, they don't come to the gallery in London because they are predominantly people that you engage with through email, through message and online. And that might seem sad, I guess, that they don't see it in person, but I think it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't really love it. It's just they're quite often quite wealthy, very international people who are kind of moving around different places. And with that in mind, I think we're already in a place where the art world is so reliant on the digital, that I think that will just continue, in my view.
Yeah, I agree. I think the role of a gallerist is to support and nurture artists and it's very, like, be very ride or die with them. You're there for their whole career, not just for a little moment and to profit off them. And I think the digital world is so interesting. And I think that's gonna thrive even more. Like I can see it going into crazy places with that. But yeah, it's really interesting.
For me, I think one thing that's really important that should come from a gallerist is strategy. Like I think artists who do very well, it doesn't just happen without, there's often people behind the scenes sort of thinking very carefully about someone's next steps and what might look to the outside as this kind of meteoric rise, someone come out of nowhere and now they're famous. There are actually a lot of people around them who've thought very carefully about what moves they should make. And I think the gallerist sort of should really be able to give that strategy, because that's not something that an artist will necessarily have the network or the knowledge to be able to map out on that kind of long-term basis. So I've always thought that that's something that is immensely useful to get from a gallerist in terms of how you get to the next 2, 5, 10 years and where you want to be.
All right, we're coming up towards the last 5 minutes, but I might roll on an extra 5. So at this point, if anyone has got any questions that they want to add in that they haven't had answered so far, please start whacking them into the chat box, so I'll try and address a few of those. And in the meantime, while you're doing that, the questions that we have left over are around inclusivity and collaboration. So if I ask you both these questions for a sort of open conversation, one is how can galleries contribute to making the art world more inclusive? And the other is, what can both artists and gallery owners do to foster a more collaborative and supportive relationship?
I would say galleries have an immense power in making the art world inclusive, but it has to be mutual. I don't think one gallery can do it alone. And by that, I mean that we need to talk to each other. I think that's so important. When galleries talk to each other honestly and productively, it sort of allows them to share clients, support artists better, sort of share, plinths with each other, share things that they need. And through doing that, we create a tone of teamwork rather than competition. Like I think if we stop seeing each other as competition and start seeing each other as for everyone's unique value, every gallery has its unique offering and its unique value. And just because one supports another doesn't mean a loss for either. It's a gain for both. So I think more open conversations between gallerists that are genuine and less bitching.
Yeah, completely agree. Something that we've done at Guts is that we've opened a project space. So I give out, it's our office, but I give out the space for free to curators or gallerists who are wanting to start out and put on a show but can't afford a space. So I think that we need to start thinking about different ways of supporting each other and thinking outside the box. I think that the art world is so insular and we rarely, step outside that box and think, what can we do differently and what can we do better?
I've seen like a really great thing happening with Pipeline and Slugtown recently between Newcastle and London. So yeah, trading artists and doing showing each
Collective Ending as well.
Say that again.
Collective Ending has also been working with Slugtown as well, which is really nice.
So these like trade-offs of collaboration are really great. And I've definitely had some conversations even this week about those kind of collaborative efforts. And I do quite a bit of that with Division of Labour Gallery as well, where we support each other. I'd have to say, like, Division of Labour Gallery was one of the galleries that like I went and worked on an art fair for the first time 7 years ago in Madrid, and that's how I understand like what an art, that's how I started my gallery basically, because I'd had one experience at a fair, and that kind of nurturing and that individual was so supportive when I said I was setting up a space, and like to have some, and I never expected that I would get that. And I've had quite a few people from like 17 and Brook Bennington, here I opened the new space, really like into what I'm doing and asked me to come and chat to them, and that is lovely, and it's not what I expected actually. So yeah, those collaborations are happening. It would be great to see more of them, of course. And that kind of trading off or showing each other's artists, I think, is a really positive way to do that kind of thing. And then the final questions are, and I reckon we can roll this into one as well, would be what's one piece of advice you would give to members of our community? Can you share any success stories where unconventional paths have led to significant opportunities?
I would say if the conventional path of like someone that works in a Mayfair gallery, i.e. me, is usually or oftentimes daughter or son, mostly daughter, of rich collectors. I'm not talking about anyone specific here, but that is the model and that is recurring. So in that sense, I would say my piece of advice is, honestly, you can go much further than you ever thought you could. Like, I never thought I'd have a job at a gallery like this. I just did not at all. And basically through just working really, really hard and not giving up and not letting myself doubt myself, just whenever I feel, even going into my interview for this role, or just literally saying to yourself, why not me? Instead of, it shouldn't be me. Why not me? Why can't it be me? And I think, honestly, just giving yourself a chance, put yourself forward for things, put yourself out there, give yourself a chance, believe in yourself, open the gallery, make the work, put the work on Instagram. Just, it can actually be you.
Yeah. I think also, like, a lot of working class people, like, we don't have anything to lose really, because we don't really have much. So fuck it, if I can say that, like, just literally go for it.
It's the opposite of like, oh, I don't have anything to fall back on. It's like, oh well, I don't have anything.
I've got nothing to lose, so let's go for it. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, concur, fuck it. I think it is, that thing is like, I have often taken some of the like hardest things and the most difficult things I've gone through, and when something is difficult and I'm sort of don't want to get into a piece of work, or I've just said, look, like you've dealt with hard on this, and that I know that one of the things I hear most from people within these networks is about the imposter syndrome, the confidence, the fear, like that kind of thing of just walking through the fear and just, you're not going to stop feeling frightened of something, just get on with it. And that feels like really old-fashioned advice, I think, but that has been the way it has worked for me, is just do it anyway, just do it anyway. And when you see and see opportunities in things, when I'm having a conversation, I have like, maybe it's an ugly trait, but I'm usually thinking, how can I work with this person? What could come out of this? Like, how can we get the best out of each other? Like, how can I connect this person with someone else? And I have that feeling all the time when I'm working, and yeah, just try and imagine, like, use your imagination when you're meeting people and think about how a collaboration could come out of that. And even when something seems like grinding and not the most fun thing to be at an event, like, there is something that could come out of it that's something you really want to do. And I guess that's my kind of wrap up of advice. But what we have is a couple of questions in here that are popping up, so I'll throw these out. So okay, so we have a question that is the question is how to get in touch to show work with gallerists and curators, especially as a person of colour with a working class background.
I think we touched upon it a bit.
Yeah, I think, do you think there's any differences when we're talking about diversity and challenges around that, I mean, or do you feel like the same, kind of just the same advice applies?
I would say the same.
Sorry,
Al, you go.
I was just going to say, you can look for galleries that specialise or make an active effort to promote artists of colour or working class artists or whatever. And it might be that is an easy bridge for a conversation, because you can say, oh, I've looked at your programme and I can see that, my experiences and the way in which I work. And it could also just be a similarity in your work. You know, in another context, you might see a gallery where you think my work fits in here. That might have nothing to do with identity or heritage or anything. But yeah, I think, you know, looking at what the gallery programs are and working out how you fit in, you know, you can actually, things can be advantageous because it could be that that gallery specifically is looking for people with your kinds of experience.
Yeah, a great example of that being like a gallery like Tiwani or something. I think something we didn't mention particularly before is like when you are approaching galleries, make sure you spend the time looking at the gallery, the work that they're offering, and their focus, because you know, I have so many people contact me about working with me, but they're clearly not from a working class background, they're in like Germany, you know, and it's something like that, or the work just doesn't chime aesthetically with anything that I'm doing. And that kind of is frustrating because it's more time to connect with that person and say it's not the right thing. So have a really, you know, do a really deep dive into those galleries and see if it chimes. So I hope that answers that question. The next one is, I want to ask about how galleries can raise funds in the early stages. Do you apply for grants? Is there any other way to get the seed money? I mean, I can just chip in with that straight away. Arts Council, really complicated to work out how to apply, but a really obvious start. If anyone's in Working Class Creators database and wants help with that, and you want to drop me a message or drop it in there, I am more than happy to have a conversation with you about it, and or put you in someone in touch with one of our team who's willing to talk to you about those things. And then there's some great advice online that I can point you in the direction of. The second thing I would say is directing yourself to your local council authority. If you're lucky, Blackburn with Darwin Town Council, I have to congratulate you for being one of the best councils I've ever worked with. They are so supportive around arts and regeneration. Not every council gives you the same thing. And also somewhere in that WhatsApp chat group, I have dropped recently like a long list of different places you can apply for commissions and funds. So it's a great resource to knock through those. Maybe after this, I will put those up again so you can see some different ways to find that kind of seed money. And sorry, I hope I just thought I'd answer that question fairly quickly for us all, but unless you have anything to add into that one.
Well, I basically just did it being nomadic, and I started off with a few £100, and then I didn't make any sales for like a year. It was terrible. But I kept at it, and I tried to find spaces where they needed something in return, like above a pub. They needed the business and they wanted money. So I would go to them and say, I'm offering you this and you will get a profit. Not in the conventional way, but in a different way. And that seemed to work as well. So it's again trying to think outside the box. Like there are different ways of doing it, and you can start off with little money and make that work. It is possible as well, but it's a more difficult route, I would say, from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the next question was pretty much that about finding pop-up spaces, so that's covered that as well. And I think you did a lot of things.
I think if you look at the obvious ones like a pier here and stuff like that, they're very expensive is what I've seen. But I also know friends who do pop-ups and they've ended up making deals like Elle suggested with the landlords, you know, and it's not always like not necessarily a pub. I'm thinking of like it is an exhibition space in this instance, but they basically made a deal that they'll fill it when it's empty and pay a bit less so that the guy still gets some income. So it's like you could think, you know, think about, okay, I want to do something in this borough, you know, in this area. I'm going to go and walk around. What's there? You know, where could I get engaged with?
I think another good one as well is if you see new developments going up. So commercial, but huge developers will set up apartments and then have a few shop spaces underneath, and often those shop spaces are empty for ages. And if you contact them and say, look, you want to start animating this space and I'll have a show for a month, and if you want me to have a show for another month, that's fine, but if you want to kick me out because you've got a tenant, they are, you know, if you don't mind stepping into that kind of commercial sector conversation, a lot of those developers don't want their shops to look empty while they've got new tenants moving in, so that's a good one too. Okay, so that is just a lovely thank you message. And some people saying this has helped me de-abstract galleries for me. Thank you very much for answering my question. Really insightful entire talk. But I think, is this the last question? Do you have any advice for decoding the complicated and gatekeeping language around the art world? I don't have an art degree. I'm working class and dyslexic, so I'd really appreciate some of the advice.
I'm dyslexic, so I can feel that, and I just think some of the press releases, etc., just a load of bollocks. Like they do it on purpose to make it more complicated. Do not feel intimidated by it. Try and understand as much as you can by Googling, but really don't put pressure on yourself because it's I think it's a lot of nonsense, really, some of the press releases that I read. I really do.
I strongly agree with Elle. I think there's been a bit of a move away from Art Speak now. It was quite trendy. It had a real sort of moment where it was the right way to do things, and actually galleries are starting to kind of revert back to actually a bit more clarity in their language, because if you might feel like you're not understanding it because of your identity, your position, your disability, but actually no one does half the time. Like exactly what Elle said, it is just kind of bollocks. Like and another thing to do is maybe read like things like The White Pube, like read criticism or discussions around art that perhaps are more digestible to you. Like I prefer to read stuff like that I actually enjoy and understand. And also like stuff like Guardian, like the Guardian reviews of an exhibition, like they're Jonathan Jones, although he can be very pretentious, it's a bit more understandable. Or yeah, things online maybe a little bit more simple, and like Emergent magazine can be interesting, Elephant magazine, like maybe Dazed has shows to see, like maybe try and find resources that are a bit outside of like dusty old books and maybe a bit more live. And read artist bios on gallery websites of galleries that you like, because often if you like the gallery and you find it digestible, you could read more of their content and learn more, because say in a bio of one of Elle's artists, there's a reference to a theory that artist finds interesting, it will probably be referenced fairly clearly, and that might be something that you can find more understandable. So I guess what I'm saying is choose your sources, find sources that you can engage with.
I wonder as well if the person who's asked this is talking as much about that in terms as well as the interpretation, but also around the way we all talk about the business of art. So, I know I met people early on who, if you were talking about an artist-led space, a blue chip gallery, like people didn't know the difference between these things. So I think one of the things is there's loads of great podcasts. I don't know if any of you would recommend it any particularly, but if you are wanting to learn about the art world and you're dyslexic and you don't want to digest that in written form, there are definitely podcasts out there that might just break this down in a simpler form. I don't know if you guys listen to any particular that you would find.
I listen to all of them.
Sorry?
I listen to all of them.
Yeah.
The Week in Art, that's quite technical, but actually quite entertaining. It'll get you into sort of, at the end, there'll be like a manuscript or something very strange that you never thought you'd be interested in. Talk Art, very digestible. You can learn loads about an artist in an hour and you feel like you know everything about them. David Werner's podcast, which is interviews, can actually be really interesting because it's like two artists or two creatives sometimes talking to each other. What else do I listen to? And Nota Bene. Nota Bene is quite wanky. So it's like two New York art guys talking to each other. But honestly, you could listen to it for a year and just sort of become an insider. Like you'd know so much because it's kind of gossipy. So that's quite a good way to get like a look in to like the way in which like very sort of sceney art people in New York or whatever talk, which is kind of entertaining. I quite like it. Yeah, those are the ones that I mostly listen to, I would say.
All right, I think we have rattled through the questions in the chat and all the questions that were being submitted. I really hope that has been useful to the people listening. I know that this is going to be hosted online later, and that Working Class Creatives Database will organise that and put some information about it if you want to revisit any of these things. I need to say a massive thank you to Bella and to Elle for this and taking part in this conversation and contributing your time, but to Chanel and Seren for organising all these talks. You've done a really great job. There is going to be a series of 5 of these, 6, don't remember now, but there will be more information about those going out, and basically they are going to address different areas of the art world or conversations that people are interested in having to support themselves in their practice and the development as an artist. So keep an eye out for those. So I hope you get to check in with us again, and thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much, Bella, Alex and Ellie as well. And for the opportunity, obviously the funding to be able to do this, and Seren for helping organise everything. And so we'll be sending everything out in the newsletter if you're subscribed to our newsletter that goes out, and obviously over Instagram, we plug everything on there, and the WhatsApp chat as well. And we've got a really exciting lineup, so please join the others. Be great.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. I don't even know what score England is.
Let's see.
Is it coming home? Who can say? I've put my email and Instagram in the chat in case anyone wants to contact with like a specific question. I'll try and definitely get back to you as best I can. And I want to thank you guys so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. I wish things like this were around when I was starting myself.
All right, thank you. I'll put my social stuff in there as well. Brilliant. All right, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.